Now, the table is always hot with current events and social issues, but sometimes the heat can get a little intense. Let's turn the temp down, take a breather, and get into this week's topic cool down. So, Andre, I wanted to ask you, do you think that it's better to be too confident or too humble? And what would you rather be seen as in terms of being too confident or too humble? And what would you rather the people around you to be like?
Um, I think that both extremes are bad. When you're too confident, you're unaware of your faults and the ways in which you can improve. When you're too humble, that can cause you to be unaware of your success and lessen your strive to improve as well. The definition of humility is literally a modest or low view of one's self importance. And in excess, that could be incredibly damaging to your self esteem and ability. Also, being too humble can sometimes manifest in a form of imposter syndrome, which means the inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved. It's kind of like when people go to award shows and are like, I know that I got this award, but I think that X, Y, and Z deserve the award more, which completely diminishes the impact that your achievement made. I think that we should all try our best to strive for a happy medium. Confidence and humility can work hand in hand. You can be confident in your skills as a writer, but also humble enough to take criticism of your work so that you can become an even stronger, more confident storyteller. You would never be arrogant if your confidence is always checked by your humility. And sometimes being incredibly confident isn't a bad thing, especially in going for your career field. No matter what you do with your life, you're going to hear no's and rejections, but you can never let that shake your confidence in your talent. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into this because we're saving that for another discussion. But what I will say is that incredible confidence is necessary to keep you pushing forward. The world around you will always humble you, but you have to have the confidence to know that even though you aren't the best in the world and that there is always someone more skilled in your profession than you, you're still a bad bitch. And your contribution to your career field is just as important as the next person's. But as far as which one I'd rather want to be seen as or what I would like people to around me to be like, it would have to echo my answer to the first question. Be confident in who you are and what you do, and be open to bettering yourself and perfecting your craft. No matter how successful you are, there is always room for improvement. And as long as you are open to that constructive criticism and apply it, you will only be the better for it. But what about you, Daquon? What do you think? What do you think?
I think, I agree on some sense that, like, the perfect world, it's having the blend of both confidence and humility. Like,
Yeah.
that is the ideal. But when it comes to just like, if I had to choose one, I would rather be too confident than too humble. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you have a marginalized identity, when you have multiple overlapping marginalized identities, society forces you to be humble. Society puts the onus on you to be humble because it's like
Yes.
you should be humble because you are not good enough. You don't walk these same lives that all of these other people have. They earned their spots there. It wasn't because of some systematic racism or whatever. They earned their place there. You just have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get it done. And if you aren't
Jane, is that
successful,
you? Is that you, Jane? I'm sorry, Daquon. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
not Jane, Miss Campion if you're nasty.
I'm sorry, Daquon. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I had to put that in there.
But I think that where was I?
I'm so
Completely
sorry.
thrown. But no, no. Okay. So society forces you to be humble. And like you said before, society will humble you time and time again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would rather be seen as the person that's too confident because
Mm-hmm.
frankly, being too humble becomes so annoying so
It
quickly.
is.
Like being too confident is also pretty annoying sometimes, but being too
Mm-hmm.
humble, seeing somebody that's always down on themselves, that's just like, oh, I don't deserve this, I shouldn't be getting this, blah 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 blah, and it's like, you got it. Somebody didn't get it, and you got it. So like, be grateful for it. Don't put yourself down. And also, when we also think about just like how the universe works, if you imagine a lemon in your mind, you think about cutting a lemon open, you think about squeezing the lemon and the juice is coming out, you think about taking a bite out of the lemon, that has an effect on your mind. You start to really imagine it, and maybe your mouth waters, maybe you start to pucker up or something like that. The same thing can happen with your thoughts on just like your creativity and your craft. If you are constantly thinking that you don't deserve something, that you are too lesser than, that you can't do something, you're too humble, your manifestations in your mind is going to become that reality. It's going to be, oh, I don't deserve this, so like I'm not even going to try. I'm not that good, so
Mm.
I'm not going to put in all of that effort. But if you're seen as too confident, then you're like, I can do that. And you may
Mm-hmm.
fail, you may be humbled, but
Mm-hmm.
you have that confidence to then move on past that. To be like, all right, this didn't fail, but next time I got it. It's going to happen. Like the numbers will be numbering at some points. The checks will come through at some points. And so I also think that seeing a confident person of color is so much more powerful than seeing a humbled person of color, because
Yeah.
frankly everybody can be humbled, but seeing somebody that is confident in themselves, in their
Mm.
identity, in what they do despite what the world tells them,
Mm-hmm.
that is true power, and that is something that I don't mind being seen as.
Yeah, I think that there is definitely an understanding that, as a person of color or as a Black person, you have to walk in a sense of confidence. You have to be overconfident to a degree, because you have to walk in the space of knowing that you are combating against so many different intersections. If you are Black and a Black woman, or if you're Black, a Black woman, and you are a queer person, there are so many varying intersections that society tells you that you are not enough, that you will never be enough, that you are never going to make it. And so you have to walk in a level of confidence to know, fuck society, I'm going to keep going because I know I'm good at what I do. I know that I'm here to offer something real and offer something unique and authentic and individual. And so I think that there's an understanding within POC circles and Black circles that, while we are expected to be humble, we have to remind ourselves to celebrate ourselves. Because if you notice, a lot of the times too, when a Black person does do something well, they sometimes are going like, oh well, I tried, but thank you. Or it's very hard for them to take the compliment or take the praise, because like you said before, we're often taught to keep ourselves quiet, keep our
Right.
accomplishments within ourselves, and not to allow that to make your head too big. Or, oh, if you say, oh girl, I did this, even if you just simply share an accomplishment with someone and say, hey, Daquon, I did X, Y, and Z, it can sometimes feel subconsciously like you're saying, oh, I'm better than you, even if that's not at all what it is. It kind of, in your mind, in the PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome, ideology, it traces back. It has roots in slavery, that, when we see people succeeding in a white world, we think they had to do something to get it. They had to compromise themselves some way to get it. Because when you look back in slavery and you look at those who did succeed in some areas, the overseers who were Black, who were told to whip the other people, and people who were quote unquote pushed into the house as house slaves, and they quote unquote lived a better life, quote unquote, because I say that because we all know that they were still treated just as bad as everybody. Race slavery was
Right.
bad, period. But we're not getting into that. This is a cool down. But but there is this kind of this history there this post-traumatic slave syndrome that traces all the way back there. And so even now in this new day and age, we still have a problem with celebrating ourselves and celebrating our accomplishments, because we, like you said, are just taught not to, and we're taught to lower ourselves than to uplift ourselves and each other.
Right.
Now, so many children grow up never knowing the full scope of what their culture has contributed to society and history. And baby, I think it's time for a change, Daquon, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. In the article written on NPS, written by Dr. Catherine Crawford Lackey, we learn about Septima Poinsett Clark. Many Southern states enforced segregation until the mid-1900s, meaning that white schools did not allow African American students to attend. Due to the color of her skin, Clark was not allowed to teach in the Charleston public school system, and instead, she had to accept teaching positions in rural school districts. Clark and others thought that it was unfair, and they protested to win African Americans the right to teach at Charleston public schools. The campaign was successful, and Clark was convinced that social activism had the power to better the lives of African Americans. In the 1950s, Clark and the NAACP advocated for the integration of public schools. Her involvement in the NAACP did not go unnoticed by the Charleston City School Board. Clark was asked to keep her membership in the NAACP a secret, but she refused. As a result, the school board fired her. No longer employed, she devoted all of her time to activism. Clark designed educational programs to teach African American community members how to read and write. She thought that this was important in order to vote and gain other rights. Her idea of citizen education became the cornerstone of the civil rights movement. She worked with Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the CSLC, to win the rights for African Americans. Septima Clark continued to serve as an advocate and a leader until her death in 1987. Do we have to
Black
say it, Daquon?
educators, Black
Do we have
women.
to say it?
Let's say Black women,
Black women,
Black women.
Black women, Black women.
I just love this story because, you know, we all hear about Brown v. Board of Education. We all hear
Mhm.
about that landmark Supreme Court case. But oftentimes, the people who are doing the grassroots activism, the people who are
Mhm.
on the ground doing the activist work of educating their communities often go unheard of. So props to this Black woman, this Black educator, this Black activist, because that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, it very.
So Batts was a U.S. District Court judge for the Southern District, New York, for 25 years. She received degrees from Radcliffe College and Harvard University Law School. Batts began her legal career with the firm of Kravitz, Swain, and Moore in New York City. Later, she was appointed Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan. In 1984, she became the first African American appointed to the faculty at Fordham University School of Law in New York, where she taught for 3 decades. After serving as an associate professor of law at Fordham for 10 years, Batts was nominated for the federal branch by President Bill Clinton, making her the nation's first openly lesbian African American federal judge. She passed away unexpectedly at her home in Manhattan on February 3rd, 2020, following complications after knee replacement surgery.
Black queer women.
Right. I just felt that this is just so timely hearing about a Black woman doing things in the law, doing things, being a judge with everything that is happening with this Supreme Court nomination. But that's a conversation for another day.
Now, as always, thank you all so much for watching and keep the conversation going down in the comment box below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And if you are listening to us on our podcast, please rate and review on whatever platform you're using. You can also follow us on our podcast and our Instagram at the Melanin Margin for updates on new content and on TikTok as well. Don't forget.
Don't forget that TikTok. And if you'd like to follow each of us, our handles are at Daquon MUE.
And at Andre Talks a Lot.
Now, we will see you all next week on the Melanin Margin, where our goal is always to bring the marginalized to the spotlight in any way we can. Goodbye now.